Frost had already claimed the grass when Naira's boots hit the cold earth outside her door, and she knew, the way a wolf always knows before she understands it, that something had come in the night that did not belong to the ordinary dark. The air tasted of pine resin and something older, the mineral sharpness of a male she had spent 3 years training herself to forget. Her hand found the doorframe. She did not go inside. She stood in the thin gray light of a November morning that had not yet decided to be day, and she breathed him in without wanting to, the way lungs breathe whether you intend them to or not. And she felt the mate bond she had buried under 6 months of silence and honest labor pull itself upright inside her chest, like an old wound finding new muscle. She had built this life, piece by piece, the way you do when the alternative is not surviving. The cabin sat at the edge of Dunmore territory, not inside it, not outside it, but in the contested fringe that no sensible pack claimed and no lone wolf defended, where the spruce trees grew so dense the wind had to push through sideways. She had chosen it because of the ambiguity. Nobody's land, nobody's woman. 6 months and 4 days since Evander had looked through her in front of the entire assembled pack and said nothing, not one word, while the council rendered its judgment. She had left before they finished speaking. Now his wolf had found her door. She saw the paw prints in the frost. Large, the distance between each pad print longer than a standard wolf's stride, the depth suggesting a body carrying more weight than aggression. He had not circled the cabin. He had walked straight to her door and sat, she could see where the haunches pressed, and then walked away east, into the tree line, without once approaching the window. That mattered to her in a way she could not immediately explain. He had not tried to see inside. He had only come to confirm she was here. The bond said, "He knows." Her jaw tightened against what the bond wanted her to feel next. She went inside and put the kettle on. 3 years before this frost, before the exile she had chosen with her own 2 feet, before they could formalize the one they were building for her, Naira had arrived in Cresthaven territory on a Thursday in late October, wearing a coat that didn't fit and carrying a pack that held everything she owned in 11 pounds of possessions. She had come from the Morrow Pack, 2 territories north, where she had lived her whole life as the daughter of a female who had seen things and paid for it until she could not pay anymore. Her mother had been a perceiver, a wolf born with the gift of territorial memory, the ability to feel the health of the land itself the way others feel their own pulse. It was rare, and it was documented in the old texts, and it was, in practice, deeply inconvenient for any alpha who preferred his pack's history to stay where he had arranged it. Her mother had Lunnian sire. Seen a falsification in the Morrow Pack's lineage records, a founding myth with a seam in it, and she had not been quiet about it the way she should have been, and Naira had grown up watching what it cost to be inconveniently perceptive in a place that preferred comfortable lies. So Naira had learned to be quiet. She had learned to catalog what she saw, without speaking it aloud. She had folded the gift down to almost nothing, the way you fold a living thing into a drawer and hope it doesn't suffocate, and she had made herself useful in ways that didn't threaten anyone. Herbalist work, territory boundary maintenance, the physical, unglamorous work of monitoring the pack's relationship to its own land. When the Morrow Alpha had died, and his son had made it clear that Naira's mother's blood made her suspect by association, she had not argued. She had found Cresthaven on a territory map, packed her 11 pounds, and gone. Cresthaven was 43 wolves and a council of 4, and an alpha who had been in his position for 7 years without a mate, which the pack discussed the way packs discuss everything they cannot change, with elaborate sideways concern. Naira had not come for an alpha. She had come for the job posting she had seen on the Interpack network: Territory Monitor, Eastern Boundary, experience with land reading preferred. She had not mentioned what she could read. She had mentioned what she could measure. She had met Evander on her third day. She was working the eastern boundary line, noting where the soil was compacting under an old deer trail that was beginning to threaten a spring water tributary, and he had come out of the trees the way senior wolves move when they are not expecting to encounter anyone, unhurried, not performing anything for an audience. He was taller than she had pictured from the pack documentation she had reviewed, wide-shouldered in a way that was less about size than about how he occupied space, as though gravity had specific opinions about him. He had dark eyes that moved across the landscape with the automatic assessment of someone who spent real time in it, and when those eyes found her, crouched in the mud with a soil depth probe and a field notebook, they did not do what eyes usually did when they found her. They did not dismiss her. "You're reading the tributary compression," he said, not a question. 14 centimeters over the last growing season, she said. "If the trail stays active, you'll lose the spring feed to the second eastern creek before the thaw after next." He crouched down beside her, not over her, beside her, and looked at where she was pointing. "What's the fix?" "Reroute the trail 15 degrees north. There's a natural shelf in the rock formation up the slope. Deer will take the path of least resistance if you give them one." He had looked at her then, and not at the soil. It was the first time in her adult life someone had looked at her after she spoke about land reading and responded with interest rather than the particular flatness that meant they were storing the information while quietly deciding she was trouble. He had said, "The last monitor we had couldn't have told me that in 2 weeks." "I've been here 3 days," she said. "I know," he said. That was the beginning. It had not been fast. She had not wanted fast. Naira had spent 26 years watching what happened to women who fell quickly and trusted completely, and she was constitutionally incapable of either. She had been careful with herself. She had let things move at the pace they moved, which was slow and real, with setbacks and misreadings, and at least 2 arguments about pack resource allocation that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with the fact that they were both stubborn people who held their positions until someone gave them a reason to move, not just pressure. The first time he touched her with intention, not the incidental contact of 2 people working the same land, was 7 months after she arrived, in February, when the pack had gathered for the midwinter boundary walk and the temperature had dropped to -11, and she had not brought adequate gloves because she had been distracted by a soil anomaly in the southern quarter and had not thought about her hands. He had found her, 2 hours into the walk, with her fingers going genuinely white, and he had not made a scene of it. He had simply taken her hands in both of his and held them, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, and said nothing, and kept walking with her hands in his until the feeling came back. She had felt the mate bond snap into place in that moment. Not gradually, not with ceremony. It had simply been there, the way a sound is simply there when a very quiet room is interrupted by something real. The certainty of him. The specific rightness, like a key engaging tumblers she had not known were installed. She had not told him. She had waited to see if he felt it. She had watched him over the following weeks with the careful attention she applied to land, noting what changed, and things had changed. He had begun to position himself in rooms so that he could see her. He had stopped holding the formal distance that alphas maintained with unpartnered pack members. He had asked her, once, in a very neutral tone of voice that was not neutral at all, whether she had plans to stay in Cresthaven long term. She had said she hadn't decided yet, which was a lie, and they had both known it was a lie, and he had looked at her with something that was warm and complicated, and then they had gone back to the work of the day. 6 months after February, in August, he had told her. They had been alone on the eastern boundary, which was her territory now in the sense that she knew every stone and soil composition along its length, and he had said her name in a way that was different from other times he said her name, and when she turned, he was looking at her the way she had waited for someone to look at her whole life, without knowing she was waiting. He said, "I think you're mine." He said it the way a man says something he has known for months, and finally trusts himself to say aloud, not as a declaration of ownership, but as an admission of something larger than himself. She had said, "I know." He had laughed. The real laugh, the one he kept for moments when he forgot he was an alpha. They had been together from that day. 8 months. She counted them because she needed to be accurate about the shape of what she was mourning. 8 months of something that was slow and honest and built from the actual material of their natures, not from performance. He had never been easy. He was reserved and sometimes rigid, and he carried the weight of 43 wolves the way some people carry debt, a constant low-level pressure organizing every decision. But he had been real with her in a way that she had not experienced before, and she had been real in return. She had told him about her mother. She had told him about the Morrow Pack, the falsified records, the specific flavor of being a woman who sees things in a community that prefers not to be seen. He had listened without qualifying it. He had said, "You're safe here." The council had not agreed. The Council of Cresthaven was 4 wolves, an elder named Harwick who had served 3 alphas and privately believed the current one was too young and too influenced by instinct, a female named Sable who managed pack finances and had an opinion about everything and the organizational capacity to enforce those opinions administratively, a former boundary captain named Dern, who had come up through military pack structure and found civilian governance surprisingly satisfying, and a woman named Isel, the youngest council member, who had been Evander's closest friend before Nyra arrived and who had, Nyra had noted from her first month, a very specific and very controlled way of looking at her. The council's objection to Nyra was not stated as what it was stated as policy. An unmated wolf of unknown lineage, with documented ties to a pack that had expelled her mother under irregular circumstances, in a primary bond with the alpha. This created a succession vulnerability, a loyalty question, a structural weakness in the pack's ability to present a unified governance face to neighboring territories. The language was careful and procedural, and it meant, "We don't trust what she is." What she was, specifically, was a perceiver. She had not hidden it from Evander. She had told him 6 months into their bond that her land reading was not ordinary territory monitoring skill, but something older and stranger, that she felt the land's memory the way he felt pack bonds, as a live current, not a measurement. He had held this information the way he held most things about her, seriously, without theater. He had said it changed nothing between them. He had not told the council. That was his failure. She did not absolve it. The council discovered it not through him, but through Isel, who had apparently retained a contact in the Morrow territory and made a call that Nyra had not expected, because she had not known to expect it. Isel had brought a formal document to the council meeting 3 months before the frost, a lineage and ability disclosure compiled from Morrow Pack records, her mother's documented perceiver status, the circumstances of their family's effective exile, the council's note in the Morrow files, ability is heritable, probability of transmission to offspring high. The council meeting had been called. Nyra had not been invited. Evander had not told her about it. She had found out the way you find out things in a pack when someone finally decides you should know, through the cook's assistant at the communal hall, who had mentioned it with the forced casualness of a woman doing what she had been asked to do, passing the information sideways like it was gossip. Naira had felt it before the words finished arriving, the quality of ambient pack attention changing, the way you feel a room angle toward a door before it opens. She had gone to Evander's office. He had been standing at his window, not sitting, which told her before he turned that he already knew she knew. He had turned, and his face had the terrible blankness of a man doing something he had decided was necessary, and she had felt the mate bond between them constrict like something preparing to close. "Tell me what they decided," she said. He said, "You can stay, but your role in boundary monitoring is reassigned. You'll be given work in the communal stores, general pack support." She waited. She knew there was more. "And they've requested, that the bond be formally deprioritized until a full council review of your lineage can be completed. It's not dissolution, it's a pause." She had stood very still. The bond between them was not pausing, it was screaming. "Did you ask them to reconsider?" she asked. He did not answer immediately, and his not answering immediately was its own answer. "Evander," she said. "I told them you were loyal," he said. "I told them your work has been exemplary. They need time." How much time? They couldn't specify. She had left his office without another word, because if she stayed, she would say something she could not take back, and she was still, in that moment, trying to find the version of this that he could redeem himself from. She walked to the communal hall, and she sat in it for an hour, and she went through what had happened methodically, the way she processed land data, separating what was certain from what was her fear translating. What was certain, the council had, without her presence or input, decided her role and her relationship status. What was certain, Evander had been in that meeting. What was certain, he had not come to her before it happened. What was certain, he had agreed to implement their decision. 3 days of this silence, this careful cordon of pack members giving her space that felt like avoidance. 3 days of Evander finding ways to be near her that were not quite near her, of the mate bond pulling between them like a wire pulled taut by opposite movements. She had kept working. She had gone to the communal stores and done what was asked of her. She had not made a scene. On the 4th day she had seen Isel come out of Evander's office with her hand briefly on his forearm and the particular satisfied expression of someone who had gotten what they came for, and Naira had felt something settle in her chest with the cold finality of late-season frost. She packed her bag that night. She did not take more than she needed. She took her field notebooks, her tools, the small carved token her mother had left her, and the coat that fit now because she had bought it herself with her first Cresthaven wages. She wrote 1 sentence on a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen table of the quarters she had been assigned. "I am not a matter for council review." She left before the pack woke. She had not said goodbye to him. That decision had cost her more than anything else. Weeks later, in the cabin, she would find herself mid-task, splitting wood, grinding dried herbs, patching a section of the east wall where the wind came through, and the grief of that goodbye she had not given would surface without warning, and just sit there, occupying the room. She had not done it because she could not trust herself to be clean about it. She had known that if she stood in front of him and said the word goodbye, she would either stay, which she could not do without forfeiting the self she had spent years reconstructing, or she would say something that would become a wall between them that could never be moved, and some part of her, the part that had felt his hands warm around her white fingers in -11 degrees, had not yet been willing to build that wall. So she had left the note. 6 months. The cabin at the edge of contested territory. An arrangement with the Dunmore Pack's outer rangers that she would monitor their northern boundary fringe in exchange for food stores and occasional company. She had rebuilt the necessary practices of a solitary life, cooking for one, sleeping in a quiet that wasn't peace yet, but was becoming something manageable, rising before light, because there was always work, and work was the only thing that reliably occupied the perceiver's mind with something other than its own contents. She had started feeling the land here differently than she had in Cresthaven. The Dunmore fringe was old territory, contested long enough that it had a peculiar layered quality to its memory, stories compressed into the soil the way rings compress into a tree. She read it in the mornings, kneeling on the frost, her palms flat. It helped. She had thought she was getting somewhere. Then the paw prints. She drank her tea at the table and looked at her notebooks and did not look at the east window, which faced the trees where he had gone. He came back the following evening. Not as a wolf. She heard him while she was still inside, the sound of boots crossing frost rather than paws, which meant he had shifted somewhere in the trees and approached human. She did not move from where she was sitting when the knock came. She let it knock twice. She opened the door on the third. He looked worse than she had expected, and she had expected something. He was thinner through the face, not dramatically, but enough that she could see the shift in how his jaw set, the slight hollowing at the temples. His coat was his field coat, the dark one worn at the collar, not the formal one he wore for public occasions. He had not come at her as an alpha. She stepped back from the door, not an invitation, just a removal of herself from the threshold. He understood the distinction and came in slowly, with the particular care of a large person entering a small space that doesn't belong to them. The cabin was one room, her notebooks arranged on the table, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beam, a fire in the small iron stove doing its job. He stood in the middle of it and looked at all of it and looked at her. 6 months, he said. 6 months and 9 days, she said, because she had always been precise and she was not going to stop now. He put his hand to the back of his neck, which she had learned in 8 months was what he did when he was trying to find words that were somewhere in a register he didn't usually have to access. She waited. I made a mistake, he said. Which one? She said. He looked at her sharply, then, all of them. Every point where I should have, all of them. The bond was alive between them in a way that was almost painful. She could feel him the way she felt the land, as a live current, a presence with a specific quality and weight, and it was pulling at her the way a tributary pulls toward its source, insistent and unintelligent and not interested in her decisions. She noted it. She kept her hands still at her sides. Sit down, she said, because she was not going to have this conversation with both of them standing and the door at his back. He sat at her table, in the chair she usually used, which was the only chair, and she stood by the stove with her arms crossed and a mug of something warm she was not drinking, just holding. The council reconsidered, he said. A month ago, Dern brought new information. Territory surveys from 3 packs that have perceivers on their boundary teams. The data was significant. Sable reviewed the financials on the boundary work you'd done in your time with us and flagged that the Eastern Spring would have been lost without the reroute you identified. That's a 40-year water source, Naira. Harwick is old enough to remember when they nearly lost it once before. It changed things. She said nothing. They formally rescinded the review, he said. Your role was to be reinstated, full monitor status, and the bond. He stopped, tried again. There was no barrier left, on their end. On their end, she said. He met her eyes. I know. You understood what they were asking, she said. When they asked you to pause it, you understood that a mated bond doesn't pause, that what they were asking was, "Yes," he said, "I understood." And you agreed. I told myself I was protecting the pack. Protecting you, in the long run, by not escalating into a confrontation that, he stopped, because the end of that sentence had no version that worked. I made a choice that put my discomfort above your dignity. I know what it was. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind moved through the spruce trees in long, even passes. She put the mug down because she needed her hands. Do you know what I did when you agreed, when I understood what you'd done? He waited. I did not fall apart, she said. I want you to know that specifically. I did not. I held it together. I left because leaving was the only thing that didn't require me to betray myself, and I came here and I built this, which is not what I wanted my life to look like, but it's honest and it's mine, and I have spent 6 months and 9 days becoming a woman who does not need the security of a pack or an alpha or a mate bond to know what she's worth. Her voice was level. This mattered to her. I am not the same person you said those words to in August. I know, he said, very quietly. I don't know if I forgive you. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. She looked at him. Something in her chest was doing the thing she had trained it not to do, which was respond to his nearness, as though nearness was the same as safety. What are you asking? He didn't answer with words. He stood from the chair, slowly, without pressure, and he moved to where she was standing by the stove. He stopped 1 full step away, and she could feel the warmth coming off him that was his temperature, not the fire, and the bond between them was singing now, low and steady, a vibration rather than a pull. I am asking, he said, to stand here, just this. Her jaw worked. She could feel the years of her mother in her, the woman who had been precise about her gifts and paid for it, and she could feel the 26-year-old who had walked into Cresthaven with 11 pounds of possessions and not told anyone what she was, because she had learned what happened when she did. She could feel February, -11, his hands around hers. She took 1 step forward, not 2, 1. He did not reach for her. He stayed exactly where he was and let her come to the distance she had chosen, and she was close enough now to feel the rise and fall of his breathing, and the bond settled around them both like something that had been waiting a long time to be still. She said, I'm not coming back to Cresthaven. He said, all right. She said, if you want to be near me, it's here, on my terms, on my ground. He said, I understand. Evander, she said his name the way she had learned to say it when she needed him to hear her specifically. I need to know that you understand what you conceded. Not just to me, to them, to the idea that my ability made me something to be reviewed. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him in that moment, the whole of him, the alpha who had been placed too young in a role that required him to be other people's ceiling, the man who had loved her in the only way he had known how, which had turned out not to be enough, and who was standing in her one-room cabin in the middle of contested territory because his wolf had found her before the first snow and he had followed it here. He said, I let them make you into a question when you were the answer to something the pack had needed for years. I will carry that. She nodded once, receiving it without comment, and then she put her hand flat against his chest. Not reaching, not pulling, just her palm against the place where she could feel his heartbeat, which was faster than his face was admitting. He exhaled. She left her hand there. The next weeks were not reconciliation in the sense she had feared, the folding back of herself into a space she had outgrown, the resuming of something that had been interrupted. They were something else. Evander returned to Cresthaven each morning and came back each evening, which was itself an act of submission to her terms that she did not take lightly. He brought no council opinions with him. He asked about the Dunmore Fringe and listened when she told him what the land was saying, not politely, not as management, but with the focused interest of a person who had learned, at some cost, to take seriously what she read. She showed him the compressed soil anomaly near the northern boundary that she had been tracking, a slow accumulation of land memory that the Dunmore Rangers hadn't flagged because they didn't know what to look for. He spent a full afternoon kneeling beside her in the cold, watching her work, asking questions that were good questions, the kind that required her to go deeper into what she was nence, seeing rather than explain it around the edges. That afternoon was the one that shifted something. Not the words, not what either of them said. It was the quality of his attention, the complete, unhurried attention of someone who was choosing to be where he was, not managing an obligation. He had looked at her work the same way he had looked at it on the eastern boundary 3 years ago, that first Thursday in late October, and she had felt the original pull of him before the complication, before the council meeting, before she had learned what happened when he was forced to choose. She had trusted him back then. The trust had been valid. It had not been misplaced in his fundamental self. It had been misplaced in her assumption that his character was capable, in that moment, of overriding the institutional pressure of 4 people who held the machinery of his pack. She was not sure those were the same thing. She had spent 6 months treating them as the same thing, and she was not sure anymore. She did not tell him this yet. She held it for 3 more days, examining it the way she examined land, from multiple angles, in different light, looking for where the reading changed. On the 3rd evening, after dinner, when the fire was low and he was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, there was still only one chair, and she had it. She said, "Tell me what you would do now." He looked up. "The same situation," she said. "Council meeting, my lineage on the table, Isel's document." He was quiet for a long time. She did not prompt him. "I would not go into that meeting without you in the room," he said. "I would have told them before it was called that any question about my mate is answered with my mate present. I would have walked out if they convened it without you." He paused. "I would have gone to you first, before anything else. I would have come to you the night before and said, 'There is a conversation happening, and I need you to be part of it.'" "Why didn't you?" "Because I thought I could manage it," he said. "I thought I could get ahead of it, smooth it out, give them what they needed, without it touching you. That was arrogant. It was also—" He looked at the fire. "It was fear. I was afraid of what it would feel like to have them say it to your face and not be able to stop it." She heard that. She let it land. "The thing about perceivers," she said, "is that we know when we're being managed. We feel it in the same register we feel the land. When you went into that meeting without me, I felt the intention of it before I knew the fact of it. I felt myself being managed." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." "I believe you," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not saying I forgive you," she said. "I'm saying those are different things." "I know the difference," he said. She set down the notebook she had been holding and stretched her legs out toward the fire and considered him in the firelight. He was patient. That was one of the things that was true about him, that had not been altered by what he had done. He was a genuinely patient person, someone who could hold an open question without filling it with noise, and she had always valued that in him. "I have a condition," she said. He waited. "I will not be a subject of governance. Ever again. Not mine, not the pack's. If you're asking to rebuild something between us, it's built on that foundation. I'm not a lineage question. I'm not a council agenda item. I'm not a vulnerability in your succession line or a liability in your diplomatic relations. I am Naira, and I have a gift that your eastern boundary has already demonstrated it cannot function as well without. And I am your mate, and those things are connected and they are not in competition. Agreed, he said, without hesitation. I'm not finished. I will stay here, on this land. If the pack needs my monitoring work, I will provide it from this location on a formal contract basis. Agreed with me, not imposed. If you want to build something long-term between us, it begins here, where I am now, not where I was before I left. He was looking at her with something that was not quite sorrow and not quite pride, and was several things at once that his face didn't usually allow. Agreed, he said. And Issel, she said. He was still. I'm not asking you to remove her from the council, she said. I'm asking you to tell me honestly. Do you understand what she did? Not as a council action, as a deliberate act against me, specifically. Yes, he said. I understand it. And? I confronted her, he said, a month ago when the council reconsidered. I told her that the contact she made in the Moro territory was a personal action dressed as policy, and I would not pretend otherwise. She did not deny it. She made arguments about pack safety that I understand from her position and that do not excuse what she did. He paused. She will not have access to decisions about you. That is permanent. Naira nodded. The fire settled in the stove. The wind was picking up outside, the first real edge of winter finding the cabin's gaps. He was looking at the floor, giving her the silence, and she looked at the shape of him in the firelight, the familiar geography of his shoulders, the way he sat with his weight evenly distributed even when he was tired, which he was, and the mate bond was warm and close and not pulling anymore, just present. Come here, she said. He moved from the floor to beside her chair, which brought him close enough, and she put her hand against his jaw the way she had in the early months, a gesture that was hers, specific to how she touched him, and felt him go still under her palm. I'm not done being angry, she said. That's honest. I know, he said. But I'm also, she searched for the accurate word. I'm not done with you. I tried to be. I worked at it. He turned his face slightly into her hand, just slightly, the way his wolf moved toward what mattered. I know, he said. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, the old gesture that meant, I see you, and I'm here, and the bond between them did not snap, or sing, or burn. It simply settled, the way water settles into the shape of what holds it, finding its own level. She felt his hands come to her arms, not gripping, not pulling her anywhere, just resting there, warm and present. Outside, the first proper snow of the season had begun while they were talking. She could tell by the specific silencing of the wind, the way sound compressed when flakes started falling in earnest, the way she had always been able to tell what the land was doing before she looked at it. The snow was coming down steady now, visible through the small window above her table, the kind of snowfall that committed. She pulled back from him, and they looked at each other, and she said, the paw prints are going to fill in. He understood what she meant. Good. She pulled back and stood, moving to the window to confirm what she already knew, the frost grass invisible under white now, the cabin's small clearing softened by an inch of snow, the tree line, the only dark thing at the edge of her vision. His tracks, both the wolf's and the man's, erased. Her land, her threshold, her terms. She turned back to him. There's a second mat in the storage corner, she said. You're not sleeping on the floor. The slow warmth that crossed his face was real. The laugh he almost let out, held to just the edge of its shape. Yes, he said. All right. She put more wood in the stove, and he helped her seal the window gap with the extra cloth she'd had meaning to address for 2 weeks, and they worked in the small space without requiring words, the way they had always worked best, two people who understood what needed doing and trusted each other to do their part. She noticed the quality of it. She noticed that the thing she had been most afraid of, that coming back to any version of this would require her to shrink, was not what was happening. She was full-sized in this room. He was working around her, not over her. That mattered. Before she turned out the lamp, she stood for a moment in the middle of the room while he settled the mat, and she thought about her mother. The woman who had seen things and paid for it, who had not taught her daughter to be small, but had modeled what it cost to be large, and who had died still large, which was the most honest inheritance she had left. Naira thought, I kept it. I kept what you gave me. I didn't fold it into the drawer and leave it there. The perceiver's gift had not failed her once in 6 months. The land had spoken every morning, and she had heard it, here, on nobody's ground, and she had done the work, and she had been enough. She turned out the lamp. The snow was still falling. The bond between them was present, and quiet and warm, the most honest version of itself, not straining, not performing, just a live current between two people who had found their way to the same room after a winter of being apart, and who were, in this moment, exactly where they had chosen to be. Not return to what was before, something new, built from what they both knew now, on ground she had claimed herself, under the first real snow, which was falling straight and clean, without hesitation, the way things fall when they have decided.